Thank you very much. Very provocative remarks. Essentially, given the way our political system works, we can only make things worse. Any response from the audience? We have about 10 minutes for questions. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
I'm a physician in public health and also a psychiatrist. I can't help listening to you both to think, so what? Are we having a major crisis for a smaller problem? You did not address two things that I would like to hear you on. The relative harm of marijuana when compared to other drugs. And the other one, if I can remember it, has to do with the very strict regulation that has already occurred in the judicial system regarding marijuana. So are these mitigating factors in the positions that you've both taken?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think you're asking really difficult questions, and I'm not going to pretend that I have an answer that will completely satisfy you by any means. I think one of the things we have to avoid the temptation on is to think of relative risk of these various substances being based only upon the intrinsic properties of the drug. You know, that tobacco is more dangerous, or alcohol is more dangerous, or cannabis. I mean, certainly some drugs have a much higher risk for dependence than others. You know, obviously nicotine and opioids are way up here, and other drugs much lower. But I mean, anybody who's worked in the addiction field, you know that there's a lot more harm in drugs than just dependence, right? I mean, there's all kinds of social harm that happens outside of dependence. So I think that's one thing. I think we have to look at what's the cultural milieu that we create around the drug. And this is why I warn about market expansion. If we have an industry that fetishizes this drug and makes it look like, you know, this is the new path to a healthier, sexier, more successful you, I think that's a high-risk practice. So I would say that for your first question. I'm sorry, I've lost track of the second one now. It was...
It had to do with the judicial...
oh, medical, you mean medicinal?
That is already there.
Right.
As opposed to the legalization that would introduce newer intrusion of government in daily life.
Well, I would take the position that, and I think arguably, that I don't think we're doing that great of a job regulating the medicinal cannabis industry. I think that, I mean, if you go to Health Canada's website, there is a fairly lengthy page on product recalls for a wide variety of problems, and it doesn't have to be that way. So there's one that I worry about. I think already we're seeing indications that the medical, there's one licensed producer who has hired really a serial criminal from the U.S. entertainment industry with a violent history of criminal behavior, and they're hiring him as their, quote, key icon advisor, unquote, for their expansion into the recreational market. And they announced this at the same time that our government was telling us that they're legalizing recreational use of cannabis to keep our kids safe from criminals. And so here's an industry that hires a serial violent criminal to, you know, be their lead guy. So I think there's enormous problems with the medicinal industry. I think there are some serious lack of judgment that worries me. And I wouldn't want to, you know, get ahead of the game. I mean, nothing would make me happier on this issue to see this industry distinguish itself from its elder drug industry brethren and sisterin. But I'm losing faith.
No, Michael gave those excellent responses. I don't have anything to add.
So as organizer, I rarely get to ask questions, but since there was nobody in the queue when I got up, I will indulge myself. I have a question actually for both of you. So for Malcolm, I remember early in the discussion about the federal provincial division of labor, I can't remember what province it was, maybe PEI, the possibility was mooted, and I think quickly it disappeared. But I just wonder whether you think it's a practical or even a theoretical possibility of a province saying, partly in response to the sorts of concerns that you've raised, this is not a problem that we, you know, this is a hole in the head. We have other problems to deal with. We're just not going to, you know, if people want marijuana in whatever province, they'll do it through the mail order route, which the federal government will handle, and we're just not going to go down that. I just wonder whether that's a theoretical or practical possibility. For Michael, so you know, looking at it from the point of view of somebody who's not looking at it in as much detail as you have, you could see a spectrum of behaviors on the part of governments with respect to drugs. There's a drug which I would include as a drug because it's addictive. It's not a substance, but it's still addictive and as destructive as many of the drugs that you've mentioned, and that's gambling. Right? If you look at gambling in this province, it is advertised, and you know, there seems to be very little limit to the degree to which the province seems willing to try to expand the market through advertising. Tobacco does feel to me like something where, you know, you walk into a dépanneur, if you don't know where to look for cigarettes, you won't see them because they're behind, you know, panels. There's no advertising that occurs. So it seems to me that we do have a bit of a gamut of types of behaviors with respect to these substances. In the case of tobacco, it does seem that we have managed through the prohibition it seems to me that there's, at least on the face of it, a positive model, a kind of a unicorn-like model, where we have managed through packaging restrictions, through advertising restrictions, through the restrictions on the way in which products are displayed, to bring consumption down. So just whether you want to moderate the sort of painting with one brush that seems to be on offer in your presentation.
Right. I mean, I think that's an excellent observation and really appreciate it. I think what I would say with regards to tobacco is we first heard about the tobacco problems from the U.S. Surgeon General in 1964. So it's taken us a long time to get our act together on tobacco. And you're right, we have made some impressive advances. Those advances have been so hard-earned, and there are people in this room who I can see who have played a big role in that. So they've been hard-earned. Government was not always easy to work with on it. The industry fought every little change tooth and nail, and they continue to resist all kinds of our public health innovations. And I think we've also seen that there's still hesitancy on the part of government. Yes, we've greatly improved tobacco, but there's still problems. We have healthcare recovery suits for all the provinces that have been delayed and delayed. I think only New Brunswick actually has a court date now. So there's that whole delay. In both Ontario and federally, we've had some research organizations and some really good advocacy organizations, evidence-based advocacy organizations around tobacco, have their funding cut. So, I mean, that's a major harm to tobacco control. It's a major gift to the tobacco industry. So while I agree tobacco is probably our best example where we've made some real headway, absolutely, the battle is not over. There's still a lot to worry about and a lot of improvement to make.
Daniel, with regards to your question, yes, it was floated. I have some insider information, I suppose, that in my province, it was floated that, yeah, why not? That's what I would recommend to government. Just, again, only from a pure political, raw politics perspective, I would say, don't touch this. People want it, they can get it through mail order. And that idea was floated, but it was rejected largely because the provincial governments think there's revenue there. They think there's revenue there. So that's what did that idea in, but that, in my view, would be a politically expedient solution to this problem.
Okay, we have time for just one last question, but it should be quite quick, okay?
Implicit in your remarks for both of you has been that the government is deliberately pursuing policies which are likely to be harmful based on past evidence. So the question is, why are they doing it?
Well, I guess I pointed that out. I think Justin Trudeau and the Liberals want to use this as an issue to appear modern, progressive, hip, and cool. And they are, in, again, raw political terms, detached from the implementation of this policy.
Yeah, but what does all that say about the electorate in Canada?
Well, I'm grateful political power is centralized, let's put it that way.
Well, I agree entirely. I think, there was a bit of a strategy of let's look cool to young voters. I think that was part of it. But we have to think that, you keep hearing everybody's doing it. This actually is not true. Young people, yes, I think it's up around 20, maybe 30-some%. But adults, only about 13% of the adult population smokes pot in Canada. It's not everybody doing it. We'll see how that changes. I think when I look at a drug policy issue, I look at it as government is the mediator between two opposing sides. There's an industry that wants to grow and expand and maximize revenue, and then you've got the public health authorities who are saying, yeah, but let's wait, let's be careful. And government has to sort of mediate that tension, right? And so I think in cannabis, I think they're leaning towards, my perception, I think they're leaning towards the industry side on that. Far too much for my liking.
Okay, thank you very much. It is now time to remind you, if you haven't signed up yet for your CLE accreditation, you sign up at the registration desk, and to say thank you to our speakers.